Hey guys, so the Adeptus Custodes Codex was released recently and it's time to discuss which units are good now, which ones you should avoid, and how to approach building the list for these guys now. I'll try to do my best to give you the most accurate perspective on which units to run, and later on my channel I'll do a full how to play video for them in the new book. As you know, the current codex has a lot of problems and we didn't get a whole bunch of good rules, if any. So we need the best units to do any kind of damage, staying on objectives, and playing the mission, because the rules themselves won't be helping us. As always, for these kinds of videos, we have 5 tiers. We have the Primarchs Are Getting Nervous, which is the S tier. These are the absolute best units that are almost perfect in any way possible for the current state of the Codex as well. Of course, because we are not talking about inter-Codex balance, we're not only talking about the balance within the Custodes books of something that is S tier in the Codex. Custodes can be a B tier in a different one, Eldar or something like that. Not necessarily, just keep that in mind. These units are very dangerous. These units are something that you will be building your roster around of, and the more S tier units we have in the Codex, usually the better. In this case, I'm not sure it's going to be this way, because these units are essentially S tier just because everything else is so hard to use. I think that's where we're going to end up, but we'll see. Emperor Would Be Proud is the tier where the units are very good. They might have some problem, some inner weakness that we don't really have a way of overcoming, but it's not enough for us to really not take them. They are also something that you will be building your rosters around, and you really want to have them in your collection. Average for a demigod, so this tier is a tier for units that definitely do have problems. There is something that they can do, there is something that you can build around off, so you might want to include them if you have a specific idea of what you want to do. Again, we don't have that much of rules diversity in the book, unfortunately, apart from other types of diversities, which there is a lot of there in the book. But the rules diversity is not something that we got, and that means that we need to really usually avoid anything that is not A or S tier. So B tier in this case might be a difficult thing to swallow, difficult pill to swallow, especially considering that in the Unitarian Field Manual that was released recently, we didn't get many discounts for Custodes, so it's not like they're a horde army now. They're still very expensive, and so we don't have a lot of points played. It's not like Adeptus Mechanicus where we can just put 156 data sheets on the table. Might as well be a Space Marine. That one is serious problems. That unit is very hard to justify putting that into the list, and you will probably want to avoid that unless you're playing something like very fluffy. You want to be extremely thematic, and you just don't really care about more or less wasting several hundred points in your list. Maybe you have like 1600 points of really good stuff, and then you have 400 points of just what you really love. Perhaps then those units will not really spoil your list, but of course will not be 100% efficient. And lastly, where did you get that armor? That's something that we really don't want to include in the army, because there is nothing that those units really do, or there is just strictly better thing in the Codex that does the same thing, and it's usually a cheaper one. So yeah, we want to avoid those. Yep, so the Agamatus bikes, they cost 80 points now. The Virtus Praetors are 75, so they are 5 points more expensive than the normal Custodes bikes. And what you get essentially is a similar kind of a package with a toughness 6, 12-inch move, 2+ save, 4+ invulnerable save, and 4 wound model, which they also have the 6-inch auto advance, but their second ability, the once per game one, is not the 2 mortal wounds against things that you don't really care about, which the bikes can't do that to vehicles and monsters if I remember correctly, so it's not that cool, really, their ability, the Virtus Praetors one. The Agamatus bikes, so the Forge World ones, they can do a 6-inch normal move once per battle in the shooting phase after they shot, so it's like shoot and scoot. They cannot declare a charge after that, so it's a nice, interesting mobility thing. My problem with them is that they don't give us anything else, and the normal bikes have very big problem, as well as these guys, just with the fact that you're paying a lot of points for something that will not really do a whole lot of damage, especially in shooting, because these bikes are even weaker in that sense than the normal Virtus Praetors. Virtus Praetors at least have strength 9 melt shot, where the best gun that these guys have is strength 7 AP2 damage 3. So they're not going to do a bunch of damage in the shooting as they could in 9th edition. They can't really fight that well as well in combat. They fight reasonably well with 5 attacks with lance. That's not bad, but just we're paying 240 points for 3, and that's a lot. They cannot go through ruins anymore because flight doesn't provide us with that luxury, so they have to go around there. That means the 12-inch move is not going to carry them that far. We don't even have the 6-inch consolidate on the bike captain anymore, so what is the point of having them in the list? I don't really know, and I don't have an answer for that. So that's why I am going to put them in the might as well be a Space Marine tier, because they can do something, you just not really something you want. And if you want mobility, if you want to do damage at a distance, you either want to go with shooting or you want to go with units that will really be able to get there and do damage. So we'll have talk about that later in the tier list. The same goes for the Virtus Praetors bikes. They're pretty much the same thing in my opinion. The only good thing about the Virtus Praetors is that they can be a 2-man squad, unlike the Agamatus, which they are only 3-man, so you have to pay more points for them. With these guys, you can just stay at 2-man squad with a captain. But again, in the current situation, we don't really have the luxury to spend so many points on something that is not really killing shooting, not really killing melee, not really fast, not really durable, not really anything. Next we have Aleya. So she's the character for our Prosecutors, Vigilators, and Witch Seekers. So all the sisters units, she still retains the Scout 6, Film of Pain 5+. She has a downgrade of Anti-Psyker 5+, instead of Anti-Psyker 4+, on her Somnus blade, which that is quite a big difference considering she was already strength 6. So she's probably wounding on 5s any Psyker anyways, so it's not really that big of a buff, to be honest. I don't know why they did it. Perhaps they've seen someone really using Aleya to her maximums and just destroying Grey Knights on the spot, maybe, but I was not a witness to that. She gives +1 to hit to her sister's squad when it's below starting strength, and +1 to wound when it's below half strength. That is why I think she's not that great, to be honest, because even if we let alone the fact that sisters have only 2 attacks still on their blades, I mean the Vigilators, the ones that actually can do combat, they only have 2 attacks, and when they are below their starting strength, it means that something started shooting at them. If something started shooting them or charging them, even though she gives fight first to the squad, so probably shooting, it means that they're probably already dead. You're not gonna get to that below half strength state where you can actually utilize that +1 to wound. And even still, +1 to wound is not, it's a great buff, it's not good enough to really make them stand out. So this package of pain, 75 points for Aleya and 100 more points for Vigilators plus a Rhino, how much it will actually do, how much damage, how big of a benefit it will be to your army. I don't think that big to really justify having her, so I will put her in might as well be a Space Marine tier, just because she has a point. There is something that she can do in the army. If you really want to run a fluffy army, perhaps with the new Sisters detachment, even though I don't think it has any chance to be competitive, you can run Aleya, but other than that, she's not really interesting. Next we have Allarus Terminators. They are a very interesting unit. I really love that model, the most models itself, the sculpt. It's a beautiful sculpt, and I was a fan of them in 8th, 9th edition, and now in 10th edition they're pretty damn good. Considering that we don't have -1 damage now, and therefore damage 3 guns and damage 3 melee is pretty much the best way to kill Custodes nowadays, their 4 wound profile is very, very relevant. Plus toughness 7, even though it feels like an infantry toughness nowadays, it's still high enough that something like a last cannon cannot wound us on 2s, so it means that it offers extra protection where you would not expect it to. You expect them to be wounded by all the anti-tank guns on 2s like you do with regular Terminators, but toughness 7 does actually come into play a few times in the game. For example, if you're running Blood Angel Sons of Sanguinius and you're running strength 7 Blade Guard, like something that I would love to do myself, I would really not want to fight against the Allarus, because then my strength 7 does not really wound the Allarus on 3s anymore and on 2s with +1 to wound. It's a very niche example, of course, but just something to keep in mind. Though that toughness means a lot, as well as the 4-wound profile. And they are a bit cheaper now. 65 points per model, which is still a bit too high, higher than I would love them to be, but I think they are more than worth the points, considering that we're not really abundant in terms of options otherwise. They have a problem with the cost, and they have a problem with mobility as well, because their only really good option to be delivered, is the Land Raider or Rapid Ingress in them, where Rapid Ingress in them is still a problem because they are quite slow, 5-inch move, and they're not going to be that mobile afterwards. Land Raider is good, but that's a whole different story. So therefore, I think their Emperor would be proud, just with the caveat that they have problems, but they are really good with that full reroll to wound against vehicles, characters, and monsters. If you're playing Shield Host, you can use Archaeotech munitions on them and get some lethal hits with their bunch of shots that they have. It's still just AP-1 shots, so unless you are in that sweet spot where your target is 3+ save and 4+ invulnerable save and just the right toughness perhaps, or it should be a character or a monster at least, it's not going to do that much in terms of shooting damage, but at least you have that option, and shooting with Custodes is a limited commodity. Next is the Humble Rhino, the Sisters Anathema Psychana Rhino, and this Rhino is essentially only as good as the units around it, so I'll put it in, might as well just be a Space Marine, because that's where most Sisters units are going to end up. None of them are must-have, none of them are almost a must-have, none of them are really good enough to run in your list but just have a problem. They're all in this category over here, I think, unless we run into something along this video that I would make me reconsider that. Therefore, their transport should be in the same category as well. Next are the Aquilon Terminators, Aquilon Custodians, and they are essentially brothers for the Allarus. I have a problem with them in that, firstly, you cannot run them as a 2-man squad, unlike the Allarus, which that is an interesting niche use for them. You can run them, the Allarus, as your back home objective scoring unit, that for 130 points you just get a very beefy unit to hold your home objective that will not die to, I don't know, a striking scorpion unit or swooping hawks suddenly popping up in the backline and shooting them, unlike the prosecutors that you usually have them there. And with their from Golden Light, they come once per battle ability. They can teleport once per game, for example, into your opponent's deployment zone if you, say, have a secondary that you want to fulfill there. The only issue with that now is that the Vigilance Eternal Stratagem, which is the new form of the hold the objective after you leave it, sticky objective rule that we have, it only works for battle lines. So this combination of Allarus sitting on the home objective is not as good as it was before, because before you could just use that and keep the objective to yourself. Now you need to essentially use that before the battle line unit leaves that, then put your Allarus there so that no one can dip strike on it, and then you can leave that objective because it's still going to be under your control. With Aquil, you can only run them as a 3-man squad or a 6-man squad, and most importantly, they don't have the full rerolls to wound that the Allarus have. Their rule is only for ranged attacks, and it's only a reroll of wound roll of 1 for the closest eligible target. So that's a very niche buff, and considering their shooting is not that great, to be honest, they just have those weird Adratic and Firepike guns of the Forge World Custodes unit, which none of them are really that crazy good. I think they are not really worth taking over Allarus, definitely, and yeah, they're probably at best average for a demigod. They're somewhere in between, might as well be a Space Marine and average for a demigod, just because there is something that they can do, which is they still can do combat reasonably well. It's just they still have the issue with mobility, and they shoot not that great, and they are not as good in combat as the Allarus. So they're significantly worse than Allarus. Probably, now that I think of it, probably I'll put them over here and might as well be Space Marine. It's a more fair spot for them, because they're just that much worse than the Allarus Terminators. Next, we have the Ares gunship. This thing, it's very hard to distinguish it from the Orion dropship, but the one that is closer to the base is the Ares. So it's a huge toughness 12, 22 wound, 2+ save, 5+ invulnerable save, flyer, which can hover, so you can start it on the board, and it essentially has several good anti-tank shots. It costs 580 points, whopping 580 points. And to be honest, in most cases, when you're trying to run this kind of a unit, which does good at shooting, but then it's not that survivable because it doesn't have any survivability buffs as far as I can see. A part of it, essentially, Big Knight stat line. And we know that it is more than possible to kill multiple Big Knights per turn for an army that has good shooting. So, considering it will be extremely impossible to hide this thing in any terrain, almost any terrain, you will be in a situation where unless you can somehow prevent them from being seen, you will most likely lose at least one if you run multiple and you're that crazy per turn. So that's not great. The Relic Castellan's Mark really helps because you can theoretically take these two arrest gunships and you can put them in reserves because the Castellan's Mark ignores the fact that they cost 580 points, and you can save them this way. Or if you have the first turn, you will get a whole bunch of shooting. So in this combination, in the shield host, I think the RS is average for a demigod. If you don't have the redeploy, I think it will be one tier lower. Possibly, if you really know how to use it, it could be Emperor would be proud, but I think in most cases, for most players against most matchups, it will be around this point. So it can do well if you can redeploy it and then save it from utter annihilation turn one if you don't go first. And in shooting, those two things, even though they would cost you 160 points, which is a lot, so you're not going to have much over that. You probably have just a few squads of Custodian Guard with Blade Champions or Wardens, something like that. But they, with their shooting, will kill a lot of stuff. So they have 4 shots at strength 12, AP3, damage D6, hitting on 2s, of course, and 3 shots with strength 18, AP4, damage D6 plus 6. That's a lot of gun, even considering the price. So not bad. Average for demigod is the tier, I think, for it. Next is the Blade Champion. So this guy was S tier, and to be honest, is still S tier in my opinion. It goes directly into S tier because it's such an important character for Custodes, especially now that we don't have the survivability that we used to have. We don't have the survivability in melee, especially the fact that we lost fights first, we lost the protection from devastating wounds. It means that the ability to actually reach combat quickly is even more important. Even though the Blade Champion has lost the reroll for the advanced roll, I still think that it's more than S tier. You just cannot run lists without Blade Champion, apart from like very specific combinations, and still I think you should have at least one Blade Champion with an infantry unit attached. Is still a great melee threat with damage 3 Victus profile and the devastating wounds, and is the fact that he lost advanced roll reroll, it's quality of life kind of a degradation, but I think you're still gonna find him very useful in all of your lists, so he is definitely S tier. And talking about S tier, we have them lined up right one after another. Caladius Grav Tank. I'm not gonna lie to you, an absolute S tier, an absolute must-have. If you really want to run Custodes as a competitive army, you essentially are forced, and that is not a good thing in my opinion. That's bad. The fact that this GW is essentially making us buy their Forge World stuff, which is overpriced. But in any case, the Caladius Grav Tank is a must-have for Custodes because you are gonna get some of the best shooting point for point tank in the game. It's very protected. It's reasonably hard to deal with 2+ save and 5+ invulnerable save. Toughness 11 as well, and 14 wounds. Of course, lethal hits against monsters and vehicles, and the beautiful strength 12 AP3 damage D6 plus 2 twin-linked gun with 4 shots at range 48. That is pretty much all you want from a good shooting tank, even though it costs 215 points now. It is unfortunately something that we have to pay to have good shooting with Custodes, especially considering that our melee is not as good now, so we cannot directly compete with strictly melee armies like Space Wolf Stormlands or the World Eaters. It will be very hard to compete there now, so we have to rely more on shooting, and Caladius is the best way to get that. Next is the Contemptor Achilles Dreadnought. So it's a 5+ invulnerable, toughness 9, 2+ save, 10 wound Dreadnought with an 6-inch move. So that is what's going to be the biggest problem with this guy, because his melee profile is pretty good. It's 5 attacks, strength 12, AP 2, damage d6 +1 with lance. So he will be wounding most things in the game on 2s with reasonable damage. I think AP 2 is just obnoxious for a spear that is the size of a dreadnought, so it should be AP3 at the very least. If there is anything in the game that is AP4, this spear should be that, in my opinion, but that is up to GW. I think they just missed the mark on this particular data sheet. It has the mortal wound output within engagement range for the dreadnought, and it's essentially the same rule as the Wolfen Dreadnought, which is quite good, though the maximum here is 3 mortal wounds, where with Wolfen Dread it's D3 +3, and you still, on a 4+, you do D3 mortal wounds, on a 6 you do 3, but with the charge roll, if you made a charge roll, then you add 2 to that, so you will be doing 3 mortal wounds on 4+. Not a bad rule, though I would like it to not be worse than the Wolfen Dread, of course, because this thing is bigger and more expensive. So it should be just as good at doing mortal wounds on the charge as the Wolfen Dread. But again, the problem here is not the output with this Dreadnought, it's not even the price, though this thing is quite expensive, 165 points. The issue is mobility. How are we going to deliver that damage to the target? We cannot put him in the transport unless we are running the Orion, which that is a crazy thing to do anyways. It's 700 points, I think, so we'll talk about that in a moment. So there is no real way that will be available to you that you can actually get that Dreadnought to combat. It needs to be 8-inch move. It just must be 8-inch move. All the Contemptors need to go back to 8 inches, because Redemptors are 8, the Brutalis is 8, Wolfen Dreads are 8, Death Company Dread is 8. Why the hell is Custodes Contemptor 6-inch move? There is no reason, in my mind at least, for it to be 6 inches. 6 inches is for the slow, venerable dreadnoughts of the Space Marines, which that is okay. They're not melee. They can be just walking slowly. No one's gonna really use them in the list, but that's okay. Contemptors, they are supposed to be faster. They're from the Horus Heresy times, and they are supposed to be more agile. That's why, in my humble opinion, he is going to go into, might as well be a Space Marine tier, because I really cannot see any reason to take him, to be honest, especially considering we have the Caladius, which Caladius is essentially 10 points more expensive unit. He still suffers from the same problem of 6-inch move. However, he has a 4+ invulnerable save, and he also has the -1 to wound in combat. So he has a few extra durability rules, and considering durability is now a much more precious characteristic for Custodes, I think this guy is going into average for a demigod, because yes, he still is hard to use, but at least if you have a couple of these and you maybe rapid ingress them one by one into combat, or just advance them across the board, they can be a not that nice thing to try to remove from an objective. Even with shooting, it will be relatively difficult, though not really difficult. With melee, it's going to be quite significantly difficult, because -1 to wound with a high toughness like 9, it's not a nice situation for almost any kind of attack. Unless your opponent is already planning to rely strictly on lethal hits, in most cases they will be wounding you on 5s or even 6s. So that's why average for a demigod, I think, is a good place for him. Next is Coronus Graph Carrier, which he suffers from the same issue as a lot of Custodes units. Why the hell would you want to run this thing? It's an 8-seat transport, which costs 200 points, so 40 points less than the Land Raider, but this model doesn't have the assault ramp. So you're not going to be able to charge after it moves with its 12-inch move. It has the fire support rule, which is similar to the Razorback, maybe even the same, where if you shoot the guns of this transport into something until the end of the turn, something that disembarked from that transport can reroll the wound roll against that. And that is only ranged attacks, not melee. How important is that? So we can fit 8 models there, so it's like, okay, 2 units of 4 Allarus. I'm not sure if we can run 4s. Probably more like a 5-man unit and a 3-man unit. Okay, so those 8 Allarus are going to be rerolling all their wound rolls against something, but they already have full rerolls to wound against vehicles, characters, and monsters. What else? Sagittarum, okay, that's 5 guys with heavy bolters. How important is that? Is it worth 200 points? Answer is probably no. Custodian Guard with double shoot, again, how much of an output is that going to do, even with lethal hits if you use the archi-attack munition stratagem on that? So no real reason to run this transport, and you're not going to have assault ramp, which that's what we need. We need to have a way for our Custodes to get into combat. Next are the Custodian Guard with Androsite and Pyrethite, I think it's how I pronounce it, spears. So the Forge-rolled Spear Custodian Guard. They cost 300 points per unit of 5, and there is no other format that you can run them in, so just a 5-man unit, no force. And you essentially have the choice of a Melta-gun or an 18-inch range damage 3 gun. And that is damage 3 at strength 5, AP 2, so it's not really something to write home about. If the damage 3 shot was a bit higher strength and perhaps 24 or better 36-inch range, I could recommend to run this in combination with Keradraxus, but considering these guys are for some reason not battle line, even though they're Custodian Guard literally, so there's no real reason to run them. So they go, oh by the way, this thing goes into where did you get that armor tier? They go into the same tier as well, because I don't think there is any reason for you to run them at all. Next are the normal Custodian Guards. So that's quite a different story. They are still the backbone of the Custodes army. They cost 225 points per unit of 5 and 180 points for unit of 4. They're still a very hard-hitting unit in combat because of full rerolls to wound that you get on the home objective. They can still fight, shoot twice when they want, once per battle. And their combination with Keradraxus is still very potent with her shooting, their ability to give her full rerolls to wound, and also shoot twice. Therefore, even though Custodes now suffer from 2 very big problems, first one is durability against devastating wounds and mortal wounds, second is durability in melee, and the overall problem of durability as well, because shooting is really good now at killing Custodes as well, because we don't have -1 damage anymore. But still, the overall equation didn't change. I think that they are S tier because you really want to run them. They're really good. They are relatively cheap for Custodes. They are good in combat, and you have ways to deliver them to the enemy, quote-unquote, the Blade Champion. So the Custodian Guard are still here to stay as the backbone of the Custodes army. Next are Wardens. So this one is very interesting. I've seen people say that they are still the best unit overall, and I in general agree. The fact that they provide us with -1 to wound and 4+ feel no pain, even though it's still the annoying activate at the start of any phase, feel no pain, which means that if you run multiple squads of these and your opponent lines up several shooting units against your multiple squads, your 4+ feel no pain will essentially be negated by the fact that they can just shoot at the unit that didn't activate it, or if you activate them both, then you've used multiple abilities at once. So it's not bad, but it's an issue. I really would like it to be, especially now with overall durability of Custodes going down, I wish it was the typical activate when you're targeted ability, not at the start of phase. And they also don't have the output of the normal Custodian Guard because they don't have the rerolls, so the best they can have is lethal hits and sustained hits. So they are now in the same category as well as the Custodian Guard. They're still very good. It's just the problem that they cannot really now stay on the objective when they're charged because they don't have -1 damage, don't have fight first. So you will have to essentially take it on the chin, hope that you will roll 4+ invulnerable saves and your 4+ really works. And for example, that you really know when to activate it. So if your opponent lines up shooting against them and something else and only kills something that is not Wardens, and you've essentially wasted your 4+ feel no pain, or perhaps they've done it in such a way that they can shoot you or can charge you, and they decide to, when you activate the 4+ in the shooting phase, not to shoot you, of course, and instead charge you, and now you don't have a way to really fight back in the fight phase before they are able to strike because you don't have fight first. So a lot of problems, but still the durability Wardens have is something that is really precious, and that's why they're in S tier in my opinion. Next is the sister Knight Centura, apologies. It's still a Scout 6 character that can lead all 3 types of sisters. She does add 2 to the move characteristic and 2 to the advance and charge rolls for the unit. So if you want to make a really zippy unit of Vigilators, you can, which, okay, provided that you disembark them from a Rhino, they can then disembark 3 inches, move 7, is that? No, 6, they still move 6. So move 6 inches, move 8 inches instead with +2, and then charge with +2. It's not a bad kind of a unit. You can possibly think about maybe running them from reserves and hope to roll a 7-inch charge from Dip Strike, which that is not bad as well. 170 points is the cost of such a package where you run them from reserves. But again, how good is that going to be? How much damage are you going to do with those 2 attacks that the Vigilators are capable of pumping out? I wish there was a way to make the Vigilators do more attacks. Then we could think about maybe running them as our scalpel melee unit. For now, they're more of a toy, in my opinion, because 3+ save and toughness 3 really doesn't go far in 10th edition 40k, and 1 wound, of course. Therefore, I think she goes into might as well be a Space Marine category, but probably closer to this side. So something like this over here. The Rhino is well closer. These guys at the very edge. This guy is in the center, and bikes are closer to the Terminators. That's roughly how I think this should be in the horizontal way. Now, the Orion Assault Dropship, you could also nickname it as the most expensive way to say make something advance and charge, because its abilities, when something disembarks from it, and it's a transport, obviously, you can advance and charge, which that sounds very cool. What doesn't sound very cool is the price, 690 points. So essentially, if you have this thing full of Custodes, that's pretty much your entire army. So you would have, 160 points for the Dreadnought, which it can carry. So you can carry 6 Adeptus Custodes units inside, plus a Dreadnought, or 12 Adeptus Astartes infantry models without the Dreadnought. So you would have, pretty much this, and maybe a couple of other units on the tabletop, and that's it. What is good about this is because if you use the Castellan mark, you can essentially redeploy or put your entire army in reserves, which, okay, that could be a plan. But other than that, 690 points is just too steep. It's not that interesting, considering that the advance and charge only happens when you have moved, and then you need to stay there for a turn, and then only then when your units disembark, you can then use the advance and charge. It's not like assault ramp plus advance. That would be crazy, where now you just need to either be stationary with this thing and then disembark 3 inches, move and advance, which how far is that going to get you, especially with a 6-inch moving Dreadnought? Not far. Or you need to fly somewhere, use the, 20-inch move. Okay, that's not bad. But then you cannot, if you disembark, you can charge. If you don't disembark, then you stay there for a whole turn, and you very likely get shot and lose the huge transport, lose 1/3 of your army, and all hope. So therefore, I think this guy is a prime specimen for the where did you get the armor tier, because there's not really anything that we can do with it. Unlike the Orion, which it has at least the potential to do damage, this thing has even lower point per point capacity to do damage, much lower than the Orion, and much less gun in it, where the transport capacity is essentially null and void, in my opinion. The quick where did you get that armor tier is this small thing over here, Pallas grav-attack. I really like the model. I really like the idea of the small mobile tank, but it's not tough enough. It's like a small dreadnought-ish profile, 9 wounds, toughness 8, so 1 lower toughness but 1 more wound, 2+ save and 5+ invulnerable save, so not bad, but its shooting is essentially just uninspiring. So you have pay 120 points for something that will not do anything to the opponent, just namely it's 8 shots at 5 -1/1 with dev wounds and twin linked. So it's like essentially the Redemptor's onslaught cannon with twin linked. It's not something that you really want to have on something that costs 120 points, which in other armies, for 160 you can buy a Lancer in Space Marines, and Lancer is much better than those extra 40 points that it costs. Next we have, if I can see correctly, these are the Prosecutors, so the Bolter Girls. They are definitely going to the S tier, because we cannot really run Custodes without them. You can, but just you don't want to. They are the best choice for keeping the home objective safe nowadays. They cost 40 points for the minimum squad, especially considering that the Inquisitorial Henchmen are now 50 points. So, and when you're talking about these very small costs, every point counts. So they are very good, and you really want to have them available to you in your army. Next, we have the Sagittarum. They are the 5-man unit of Custodes, essentially with heavy bolters in their hands. They are not bad, to be honest. Their heavy bolters are just like the heavy bolters, identical, 36-inch range, 3 shots, 5 -1, 2. Problem is the -1 AP, which that is not really anything that will do a lot of damage unless you're running them in the Talons of the Emperor, where you have the Talons interlocked stratagem, which gives extra AP and extra strength, but that's a very niche application. Though still, it's not a bad shooting profile, and I like the fact that they still have the Misericordia, so they have 4 attacks with 5 -2, 1. So they also get devastating wounds once per battle, so you can use that. In the shooting phase, you can also apply a -1 to hit modifier to something they have shot, because they suppress it with their saturation volleys. But other than that, their profile, their output is not great. So I will put them in average for a demigod, just because there is this interaction with the Talons interlocked ability, and they are also cheap, 45 points, the same cost as the normal Custodian guard. Normal Allarus Captain. This guy is Emperor would be proud, and here's why. So first of all, just 2 Allarus units nearby. That's nice, cool. I like it aesthetically. But really, why I like it is him is because he has the change all damage to 1 ability now, which that is very potent, considering that you can also have in the Auric Champions 4+ Feel No Pain on him. Especially when they change the Auric Champions to not be only epic deed stratagems, when some of them will be battle tactic, that will be even more worth it. But in general, he's a very efficient unit for the price, especially if you give him like the extra damage relic from the shield host, from the whole of armies. So his spear is extra strength and extra damage. And considering that you need to have, if you're playing shield host, you need to have at least 1 captain, because you must have the Castellan's Mark relic. It's an auto-take relic for any kind of list that you're running. Just so powerful to be able to redeploy 2 units after you know who's going first. So you need the captain. The captain on foot is just so bad, you don't want to run him. And he is going to go in a probably average for a demigod tier, just because I just, it's sad that he wasn't S tier last time, and he's in average for a demigod, but he cannot be an Emperor with proud. He's just too bad. He lost the potential for the 3 katas. He can now only do 2, because there are no 3 katas anymore, and we don't have the -1 damage stratagem anymore, which you really want to have. Really wanted to have a captain for that, because you didn't want to pay 2 CP on the Wardens. So nowadays the captain needs to be good just by himself, and Allarus captain is good because he is very beefy for captain. He can do well just as a lone model. He can tie up stuff and really survive quite a lot of hurt, especially in Auric Champions, and he's not bad as a part of the Allarus squad. And the same situation, I think, with the Bike Captain. They're both in a similar category. Bike Captain is an interesting option, considering the lack of options we have in the Custodes book. It's an interesting option to just have 1 mobile character who can carry the Castellan's Mark. That's, again, only just because we need to have those characters if we're playing the Shield Host, and Shield Host is probably the only way you would be playing Custodes now, I think, unless you just have a whole bunch of sisters and really believe that you can hide those sisters so well that they're not going to be carried away from the board in the first 1 or 2 turns. That is, of course, I mean the Talons of the Emperor detachment, where all of your interactions are essentially tied to having sisters near your Custodes. So Bike Captain still moves 12 inches. He still is relatively durable for a character that has no lone up rule. You can still, after fighting with him, make a normal move, a fallback move of 12 inches once per game, which that is an interesting ability. You unfortunately cannot do that anymore without fighting, so essentially you have to find a target for the charge and only then move 12 inches. But that's still very fast, and Custodes don't have a lot of choices in terms of fast units that can get somewhere, so that's why I think it's at the bottom of the Emperor would be proud tier. Telemon Heavy Dreadnought, so it's the Redemptor for Custodes kind of a unit. He costs 235, which is 25 points more than the Redemptor, and he has 4+ invulnerable save, which that is nice to have if you are playing against something that has AP 3 in shooting or even AP4. It's interesting. It's a good thing to have, of course. Just like a Redemptor, he has 5 attacks hitting on, in this case 2s, but the same strength 12 AP2 damage 3 profile, which that is not bad, but nothing to write home about. His problem though is that unlike the Redemptor, which has a great macroplasma incinerator cannon, he only has, the best gun he has is probably the Iliastus Culverin, which is strength 9 AP1 damage 3, so almost no AP whatsoever. You can change that to Arachnus Storm Cannon, which for some reason now is like a Onslaught Gatling Cannon profile, strength 6 AP1, even though Arachnus was always and still is on other models anti-tank gun. In this case, for some reason, they changed it to be some sort of a Gatling weapon. So those 12 shots hitting on 2s with strength 6 AP1 damage 1 devastating wounds, that is not interesting at all. It's just not fun. For 235 points, you want to be able to do damage, and he does not do damage at all, in my opinion. So even though he has -1 damage and 4+ invulnerable save, so he is durable, the fact that he cannot really do anything but stay durable means that he probably needs to go somewhere between average for a demigod and might as well be a Space Marine. Yeah, I think might as well be a Space Marine. Top of the tiers is the best place for him. Next, we have Trajann Valorous. He unfortunately lost his fight first ability, but if you're playing him in Auric Champions, he is Emperor would be proud. If you're not playing him in Auric Champions, so he cannot do fight with 12 attacks 2 times per game, he might as well be a Space Marine, because like, why would you want to run him? In my opinion, there's no real reason to, and his damage output is not good enough outside of that detachment. If you're running him as Auric, if you have the chance to fight twice with 12 attacks, he does have quite a lot of output, so I would put him in this tier over here. Why he is so bad without the Auric Champions is because his rule for leading a squad is very bad. It's ignoring hit roll and ballistic skill modifiers, which are not that often occurring, and you don't see them that often in the metagame. You really want to have ignorers, you really want to be able to ignore wound roll modifiers, you want to be able to ignore damage modifiers, but not the hit roll. Hit roll is kind of a meh thing, considering that we're already hitting on 2s, so it's not even that big of a deal hitting on 2s or 3s. Don't get me wrong, it's good, but we are paying 150 points for this guy, so he should be doing more than just do a bit of damage with his strength 10 AP2 damage 3 axe. Next is Valerian. He lost his reroll for some reason. I don't know why they decided to nerf him. He was only used by a select few players, so I find that suspicious, and I don't know why they did it. He still has Film of Pain 6+. His spear is still significantly better than the spear of the normal Custodes captain. He still leads the same Custodian Guard of Wardens, and he has the extra protection from AP1, minus AP1 for the melee that is attacking the Custodes squads that he leads. He also has still once per game, after making a hit roll, wound roll, saving throw, he can change that to a 6, and he costs 110 points, so he's the cheapest Custodes character along the Blade Champion to lead a squad. Of course, he loses completely to the Blade Champion in terms of utility, so he probably is going into the top of average for a demigod tier, just because, like, if you have 110 points and you want something to be led by a character, it's going to be Blade Champion absolutely the 100%. So that is why he's here. If he was cheaper than the Blade Champion, he would go up a tier, in my opinion. Next is, oh my goodness, it's the Venerable Contemptor Dreadnought. Even though I have 3 of these guys and I really like the model, I really like the whole idea of mechanized Dreadnought Custodes, and that's what I ran in 9th edition, unfortunately, the Venerable Contemptor Dreadnought is just bad. He costs 170 points, he does the same damage in combat as Redemptor pretty much, which that is not bad, don't get me wrong. If he was able to do something in the shooting, I would say definitely go for him. But because he has just a multi-melta in his fist, and he can only change that to an assault cannon, which that's just 6 shots at strength 7 AP1 damage 1 with devastating wounds, he's not doing any damage in shooting at all. For 170 points, which is almost the same cost as a Vindicator with Space Marines. And yes, the ability to stand up from death on the 2+ with D6 wounds, it's cool. And that's probably why they think 170 points is an okay price for him. But there's just no real reason to run him. He will be just collecting shots and not doing anything in return, because 6-inch move, again, is not enough to make him viable in combat. And the shooting is not viable, just period, for him, of course. So yep, he's going into where did you get the armor tier, because yeah, he's that bad. Now, my favorite Venerable Land Raider. First of all, I wish that he retained from the 9th edition the 6+ Film Paint, because I think it was very cool that the Custodes Land Raider had the 6+ Film Paint that the dreadnoughts had. Now he doesn't have the 6+ Film Paint, so he has the same durability as the normal Land Raider. However, that durability is quite substantial nowadays, and his best part is that he provides us with the thing that we otherwise don't have, which is the mobility to get somewhere on the board. His problem is he's still 10-inch move compared to a 12-inch move on the Redeemer, so he is 2 inches worse than the Redeemer or Crusader with Space Marines, but that's all we get, so we have to judge him as a Custodes model. And he does have 4 shots with less cannons, which is very swingy, so don't ever hope that you will be, I don't know, destroying a tank with that. He might do a lot of damage and might do just 2 or 3 wounds, or maybe even nothing, so never hope that, well, you can hope, never really trust those guns to be able to do something. You should have some reliable shooting, like the Caladius grav-attack, for example, to really do that damage. You can have him as a support gun. For example, you have 2 Caladius and then a Land Raider, Custodes Land Raider. You might do extra couple of wounds and finish off a truck or something. And he's not here to be shooting, he's here to be our delivery methods. That's the delivery method for our Allarus, or potentially the Custodian Guard, maybe Wardens, but usually you want Wardens outside because of their durability, so you want their durability to work for you. So Venerable Land Raider, he goes into Emperor, would be proud. Next are the Venatari. So the Venatari are still a very expensive unit. Their price did not change, I think, at all from the Unitarm Field Manual update, and they're still 400 points for a unit of 6. Why I think they are better now than they were in previous iteration of the Custodes book, which is the index, is because the delivery now is even more important than it was before, because we don't have the durability. It's a simple equation. If you have a lot of durability, you can withstand having less mobility, because you will be able to spend more time on the board getting to your opponent, whether you are a shooting or melee output unit. Now that the Custodes are not durable, you really want something that can be good with delivery, something that has innate delivery, perhaps like the Venatari, and that's what they have. They have free rapid ingress, and they have a 10-inch move with fallback and charge, so you can deploy them behind a ruin, then move them out in your turn, so you rapid ingress them in your opponent's turn, move them out, and then charge something. That is, of course, a delayed charge, so you're doing that turn 2, hopefully, maybe even turn 3 if you're going first. But that at least is a reliable way to do so, and their lance on the spears is going to guarantee that you do at least some damage. I really hope they get at least a 5 points cut, so the 6-man squad costs like 370 instead of 400. That would make them a bit more easy to digest having in the unit, but still they're going to Ember would be proud, in my opinion, and they're definitely closer to the left side, so closer to the S tier. They just have the problem with cost, so that's why they're closer to this side, but I think they're at the very top of the A tier, in my opinion. The Vigilators and the Witch Seekers, so they're both going into might as well be a Space Marine, because they are sisters, so they have the innate problem with being toughness 3 plus save. The Witch Seekers are interesting because they have the Scout, so if you want to have a party boss with the Rhino filled with Witch Seekers and maybe the superior, sister superior, Knight Centura, I mean, so you can have that and perhaps do a bunch of wounds to, I don't know, Scout unit or something, but that is an expensive, relatively expensive package that only works once. And even the Sisters detachment, as far as I could see, doesn't really give us anything that would make them just such a standout unit that would do a whole bunch of damage. Their +1 attack to the torrent weapons, so making them their flamers d6 +1 from the purgation sweep, now made in vigil stratagem. It's cool, it's nice, neat, but it doesn't really change the equation at all. It doesn't make their flamers something like the aggressors plus the Gravis Captain combo in the Firestorm. Earth ending, a life ending combination, something like that. So they're cool, interesting, you can use them. It's not going to break your Custodes army. It's not going to all of a sudden make your win in an RTT impossible, unlike running a bunch of invulnerable dreadnoughts and the 3 Pallas grav-attacks and the Orion assault gunship, and then someone wins a grand tournament with that, and I look like a fool. But just hear me out. I think that those units in the D tier, they are just so bad that they are really making it very difficult for you to actually do something. If you have like 1 or 2 units from the C tier, you are not really biting your army that hard, so you're not going to really destroy your ability to win games. So I think they're okay and might as well be a Space Marine. There is some utility to having flamers, maybe on your home objective, so you can overwatch something that pops up. If that's something very, very cheap like the sisters themselves, it can be useful, but that's pretty much the extent of it. And we've already discussed the Vigilators with their 2 attacks, so I don't think we need to talk more about them. Well, let me know what you think about this tier list. I very well might have positioned some units incorrectly, so let me know in the comment section. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.